Okay, so my recording for my formula and everything had recorded too quietly and you couldn't hear a thing. So I'm actually going to go over the equations and things like this for this. I will let you know in advance that I kind of made this bigger so that she could grow into it, but I'm going to do it to the size. The video will be for the size she's wearing, which is more like a size 8 to 9. Probably can go even a little bigger than that. But the size I'm going to give you in here is going to be for a size 5. Okay? But, yeah. So this is kind of what the PDF is going to look like. I'm not quite done with it. Alright, I'm going to go over the formula. You need to do a swatch of 20 stitches by 30 rows. And it needs to be done in a 1/2 inch gauge. Now I use the Flexi Loom for this, but you can use an X Loom, but it's not going to be seamless and you're going to have to sew everything up. But you can make this on an X Loom, but I use the Flexi Loom so that you don't have to take the stitches off the loom and put them on a stitch holder. But if you use the X Loom, you're going to need to take the stitches off and put them on a stitch holder. And if you're making this, you'll need 144 picks. So I think you're going to need the extra large to do this, which is good because you can also make an adult sweater in a 1/2 inch gauge in the extra large. Okay. Alright, so let's get started on this. Now, when you do your swatch, you will need to press it. The reason being is you're going to need to press the sweater itself. And yes, this up here has been pressed, except for the neckline area. Okay, I didn't press that, mostly because I still wanted to have spring. But everything else is pressed, and you see it. Okay, so you're going to need to press your swatch, and that's going to give you even more accurate. Okay, so I got 5 inches, 5 by 5. You divide the 20 by 5 and the 30 by 5, and I need to flip that to get stitches per inch, okay, and rows per inch. Now I got 4 stitches per inch and 6 rows per inch, but depending on the loom you're using, it may vary. Okay, but for the yoke part of this, you need an adjustable loom. You can't have a non-adjustable, so this needs to be flexi or it needs to be X. Either way, you have to have an adjustable loom. Alright, so you need to get a series of measurements. You need to get a chest measurement around. So you need to get the chest circumference, you need to get your arm length, your arm circumference, your neck circumference, your neck length, your wrist circumference. You need to get a measurement from the pit to however long you want the dress. Now typically that's about mid-thigh for me. You need a measurement between the pit and the base of the neck. Okay, and I think that's all the measurements you need. You also need the neck length, which is right here. Okay, so here's how the formula works, and I am going to show an example down below, and you may want to take notes on your own. I use a little chart to write my measurements out and everything, and I'll try to include the chart that you can print out and write your measurements in and that kind of thing. What I decided to do is do my full chest measurement times the stitches per inch, which means what I've done is taken and doubled it, and that's just for the front half. Okay, not for both halves, just for the front half. And what that does is it makes it double the chest on the bottom, and it gives you that skirt effect. So you do your chest measurement times the stitches per inch, which is your total stitches at the bottom of your front and back. They're done separately, so this is what you start with to just do a front. This is what you start with just to do a back. Now you need to take the chest measurement and you need to divide it in half to get what you need to be decreasing it down to the top. Alright, so the inches the chest divided by 2 equals inches for the top of the dress. So a way of doing it is you've got this long measurement here, and you're going to go up like a little triangle. So we've got this measurement down here, which is total stitches down here, and then we got this measurement here, and that's that measurement. And then you're going to take that measurement here at the top of the dress, so inches for the top of the dress times the stitches per inch. So that tells you the stitches here, and that tells you the stitches on the bottom of the skirt. Now you got to figure out how to get from here to here on that measurement, and that is what the rest of this is for. Alright, so what you do is you take the total stitches here minus by the total stitches of the chest here, and that gives you the total number of decreases that you have to get from the bottom of the skirt to the top just under the pit. Okay, alright, now you're going to take the total decrease and you're going to divide that by however many decreases you want per row. Okay, I do 8 decreases per row, and that equals my total decrease rows. So if you're doing 8 decreases per row, I'm only going to do it so many times, because I'm doing 8 decreases, and that's in a single row. Now you can split them up if you're using the Flexi Loom, but I select it into 4 sections, and I explain how to place the markers for that. But if you're doing the X Loom, it's already set for you. Okay, so the next thing is you need to figure out how many rows you need to do. So you do the dress length in inches, however long that was, from the pit to the mid-thigh, or however long it was, times rows per inch, and that gives you your total rows. Okay, we're going to take your total rows, and you're going to divide that by the total decrease rows. So total decrease rows, and that gets you your total sets. So that's how many rows per set. Alright, and it gets explained. So typically, like for the example here, you're going to have like 15 rows. One row will be a decrease row where you decrease 8, and then 15 rows will just be a regular knit. Okay, then you have the placement of markers, so that you know, and then you got to move them around and keep up with them. And I explain that in the video when I start making it. You want to take the total stitches up here, and you're going to divide it by 4, and that gives you the placement of the stitch markers for the decreasing. But what I like to do, so that it's kind of more even on both sides, is I divide that in half again, and what I do is, and I explain it below with actual numbers, so it makes more sense. So what I do is divide that again. So I just take this number and I divide it again to do my first placement of my first marker. Okay, so whatever that number is I count that over and I put a stitch marker. And I'll explain that in below when I use my example. Okay, but that's your basic. Alright, your sleeve. The sleeve is outrageous. And the reason being is the cuff is fit exactly to the wrist. Then you're going to expand out. You're going to increase out, and then you're going to knit a lot of rows, and then you're going to kind of decrease in if you want. You can leave it out exactly as it is, but that'll change up some of the equations if you choose to. Okay, not necessary, but if you choose to. Okay, so what you need your wrist width plus 4 inches. Okay, but I think I did the wrist width pretty much exactly because I wanted it to fit nice and neatly to the wrist. So this is optional. You can use the wrist width, or you can do the wrist width plus 4, depending on how tightly you want it to fit on the wrist. I do wrist width exactly for this, and that way it fits perfectly to the wrist. But if you choose to add 4 inches, you always want to add 4 inches to the width of anything. It's so that you have room to move, which gives you extra to work around. Okay, so you take the total wrist width in inches and you times that by the stitches per inch, which is your total stitches to start. Now, you have your cuff length, and that's however many inches you want. I usually choose to do about 2 on a kid. It may vary 2 to 3 inches, depends on how long you want it. And however many inches you choose to do, you multiply that by rows per inch, and that gives you your total rows on your cuff. Now, you want to take your arm width, around the fattest part of the arm, and you're going to plus 4 inches. And that equals your total width in inches for your arm. Okay, giving your arm some comfortable room to move in. It doesn't feel skin tight. With your total arm width in inches, multiply that by your stitches per inch to get your total stitches to increase to. So then you take your total stitches to increase to and minus the total stitches to start with to equal the total increases that you'll need from the wrist cuff to the actual sleeve itself. Now the total increases will be divided by however many times you want to increase per row, minus 8 again, with total rows to increase. My length arm times rows per inch equals total rows. So you take the whole length of the arm and you multiply it by rows per inch, and that gives you your total rows. Well, you need to dwindle that down. You need to take your total rows and you need to minus your total rows on your cuff. Okay, and that gives you the total rows left. Now, increasing happens fast. An increase row, and usually an increase row and a knit row. So you increase a row and then you knit row on something like this. So you take the total rows to increase and you multiply that by 2. And that's the total rows needed for an increasing. So the total rows left minus the total rows needed for increasing is your total rows to knit. Okay. Now, when you do your starting point, you're going to kind of do it the same way as you do up here, and I'll make sure I make a note of that. You're going to take your total stitches for your starting down here, and you're going to divide it by 4, and you're going to do the same marker placement. Okay, so you're going to do that, and I'll make sure that I add that down here so that you know where to place your markers. Okay, now we're to the yoke. This is where you take all the stitches you put aside for the sleeve, front, and back of the sweater together. And it's a lot of stitches. It's like almost 150 on this particular sizing, but you can make this for yourself if you're an adult. Okay, so what you want to do is you want to get your neck circumference, and you want to add 4 to it. And that's your total inches for the neck. And you take your total inches for the neck and you multiply that by your total stitches to decrease to. Okay, because you've got all these big stitches here, you got to know what to decrease down to, and that gives you the amount to decrease down to. So you're going to combine all your stitches up here, all of them, and then you're going to minus the total stitches to decrease to, which gives you your total decreases, how many decreases you actually have to do. Now you're going to take those total decreases, however many decreases per row you want to do. I do 8, and you can disperse that more than I do. I base mine more off the X-Loom, but you can do it whatever way you want, but I choose to do 8. So when I do 8, I divide that by the total decrease rows. Okay, and when I divide it by 8, that gives you the total decrease rows. Okay, but you need to get your measurement from your pit to your base of your neck, and you need to multiply that by rows per inch, which gives you your total rows that you're going to do in that small section from the pit to the neck. Okay, now you're going to do your total rows divided by the total decreases rows up here, and that gives you your number of rows per set. I can tell you the row sets per this one, and then compared to, say, the back is going to be quite a bit different. It's going to happen a lot faster here. Okay, and then you get to your turtleneck, which is your neck length times 2, which is your total inches for the neck. And you're going to take your total inches for the neck in here, and I do multiply it by rows per inch to get your total rows. Okay, so let's kind of make sense of this, shall we? on knitting it up. So here's my measurements I'm working with. Stitches per inch is 4, rows per inch is 6. My chest is 22 inches in circumference. My arm width is 7 inches. My arm length is 13 inches. From pit, under the pit, to the dress length is 14 inches. Wrist width is 5 inches. And the neck length is 3 inches. And the neck circumference is 11 inches. And from pit to base of neck is 7 inches. Alright, let's get the math done for the front. There's my chest circumference. See that 22? 22. Okay. 22 times the stitches per inch is 88 total stitches. Then I need to get down to whatever half of that is. So I need to do 22 divided by 2 is 11 inches at the top. Then I need to multiply 11 times the stitches per inch to get 44 total stitches at the top. 88 minus 44 equals 44 total decreases. So if I have 44 total decreases and I'm going to do 8 decreases per row, I'm going to divide that by 8 and I'm going to get 5.5 total decreases per row. So I've got 5.5 total rows that I need to have a decrease done on. Alright, so we're going to take our 14 inches, which is our length that we chose to do from pit to however long we want the dress, times our rows per inch, which is 6, and that equals 84 total rows. Okay, so we're going to do our 84 rows and divide that by our total decrease row, which is 5.5, which gives me 15.27 numbers of rows per set. We're going to round that down to 15. So what this means is you're going to do 14 rows of knit and 1 row of decrease. Okay? And you're going to end up doing that 5.5 times. Alright, well you need to find out how to set up your stitches. Okay, 88 divided by 4 is 22. The total stitches between markers. I personally would divide the number in half for the first marker to be placed. So I'm going to divide that in half, which means I need to put a stitch marker on the 11th stitch. Then from then on out, I count to 22 stitches and put a stitch marker on the 22nd stitch that I counted over. It works for the same on anything that you're going to divide up. That is my suggestion. You can do it however you want, but that makes it even because you're knitting flat. It's very important. It's not as important with the sleeve, but it's very important here. Alright, let's move on to the sleeves. Keep in mind this is front and back. Now, let's move on to the sleeves. So we're going to take our 5 inches, and I decided not to add the 4. Okay, I'm just doing 5 inches on my wrist. I'm going to times that by 4, which is 20 total stitches to start. Okay, so I've got 2 inches for the cuff that I want, so I want it to be 2 inches in length times the rows per inch, which is 12 total cuff rows, alright, which is going to be a root stitch. Now I need to know how much I need to do for, say, the arm. So I am going to add the 4 inches there, so it's the arm width plus the 4 inches extra, and that's a total of 11 inches for the arm width. So I'm going to do that 11 and times that by stitches per inch, and I get 44 total stitches for the arm width. So I'm going to take the arm width minus that by the cuff width of stitches, and I get 24 total numbers of stitches to increase to from the cuff. Okay, so I need 24 divided by 8 because that's how many increases I'm doing per row, and I'm going to only have to do 3 rows of increasing. Now I need to figure out my total rows. My total inches for the arm is 13, and I times that by rows per inch, and that equals 78 total rows. 78 rows minus the 12 for the cuff is 66 total rows left after the cuff. Alright, so I need to do my increasing row, and what happens typically when you increase a row, you increase and then you increase a row and then you do a row of knit. Okay, so you're going to take that 3 and you're going to multiply it by 6. So you're going to take the rows increasing, you're going to divide it, you're going to times that by 2, and you're going to get 6. So you're going to get 6 total rows needed in that increase section. It's going to be really fast. Okay, so take the 66 and minus 6, and you have 60 total rows to knit. Now, this is optional. You do not have to do it, but you may at the top of the sleeve want to get it to the arm width exactly in inches. If you do, follow this equation. Alright, 7-inch arm width times stitches per inch is 28 inches. 44 minus 28 is 16 total decreases needed. 16 divided by 8 equals 2. Only 2 decrease rows needed. So there's only 2 decrease rows needed. So you're going to 2 times 2, which is 4, because you have a decrease row and a knit row. Okay, and the 4 total rows needed to decrease from down to 44 to 28 at the top of the sleeve. So 60 minus 4 equals 56 rows knit. Then do the decrease section above. Okay, so you're going to do 56. So if we're getting this correctly, you're going to start with 20 stitches, do 12 rows of a rib stitch, do 6 rows, so you're going to do a row of increase, then a row of knit, a row of increase, a row of knit, a row of increase, a row of knit. Then you're going to do 56 rows of knit, then you're going to decrease, knit a row, decrease, and then knit a row, and then you should be done. Catch how that is? Alright, let's move on to the yoke. Now that we've done our front and back on our gauging things, here's how they combine. The 44 stitches from the front and the back, the sleeves 28 and 28 stitches together to starting to work with the yoke. So if you're working with the Flexi Loom, this is really easy. Just click all your links together. You'll want your sleeve, then you have your front here, and then your front and the back, and then your sleeve over here. And I'll make sure I post pictures, show what it looks like, but you also have a video tutorial up ahead on the top. Alright, so we need to know what we got all these stitches, we got to get it to the width of the neck, right? So 11 inches is the neck plus 4. We want it to be nice and loose, and we can fit it overhead and not be like skin tie around her neck, right? So that's 15 inches for the neck. So let's do 15 inches times the stitches per inch. That's 60 total stitches at the neck. Then you want to do 144 stitches total up here, minus the 60 stitches here, to get a total of 84 decreases from the widest part of the yoke to the smallest part where the neck begins. Alright, so then you're going to be doing 84 divided by 8, which is how many decreases that you're doing per row, and that gives you 10.5 total decrease rows. Alright, well, you got to find out how many rows you got to do so that you know how many of those you got to do in a set. So let's get that set up. It's 7 inches from the pit to the base of the neck, and you're going to multiply that by rows per inch. That equals 42 total rows for the yoke. Now what you want to do is you want to take that 42 and you want to divide that by that 10.5, which is your total rows for yoke and your total decrease rows, and you're going to get 4 total rows per set. What this means is 3 rows of knit, 1 row of decrease. Okay? Then you're going to get to your turtleneck area. You have 3 inches and you're going to multiply that by 2. And that's going to double the neck area. You may want it longer if you so choose. I did it longer. Equals 6 and the neck length. 6 inches by rows per inch, which is 6, is 36 total rows for the turtleneck. As I said, you can do more if you'd like more for a fold down or to sit high on the neck, which I personally did. I did 60 rows. It is entirely up to you. Now let's say you want to add a pattern in places like I did, which I'm going to give you my chart. But if you ever want to add a pattern to something, you need to calculate into your chart. And I'm going to kind of give you a guide as to how I go about that. So I want one at the bottom and one at the center top front. And I know I have some extra rows for the bottom, say 20 rows, because it was, what, 15.5, so you have like a few rows extra overall. And so I usually do like 4 rows of a seed stitch or a garter stitch at the bottom to start. Then you have to do your, I do 16 rows to work out a pattern for the bottom. Again, you have extra rows overall because it was 15.5, so you have some extra to work with. So 16 with the bottom without having to fuss with any decreases, and that's my goal. I want to trim at the bottom, but I don't want to have to fuss with my decreases and keeping up with the stitch pattern, particularly with a lacing stitch pattern. Alright, but I will post my stitch pattern below so that you have it and you can use it. But you'll also need to keep in mind how many stitches the pattern takes up and how many sets of that pattern that you can do. So say I have 88 and I have 16 stitches per my pattern, that's 5.5. Well, you can do the extra stitches of just plain knit on the ends of the front and the back, because it's going to be hidden by the arms and the hands, and they're not going to see that. Okay, so this is fudging the area to make it work nicely. My write-up will be without the stitch pattern on the sections with the stitch pattern. I will make an extra section for that. So my example written is without the stitch pattern. Okay, and when I go to write in for my stitch pattern here, I'm going to be changing up, and I'm only going to do the first well, I start with a sleeve when I go to do the front and back. Okay, this is where I'm going to show the adjustment. So I usually work a seed stitch. I don't tend to work the garter stitch. So I personally use the seed stitch. Alright, and I tell you how that's done. Alright, now what I'm going to do when I go to rewrite, when I write the stitch pattern in, I'm only going to write the back and front, and I'm only going to work from row 1 to row 19 or 20. Okay, that's all I'm going to work. I'm going to rework that and show you how to do that. Now, when I go to do the yoke area, I will explain how to do the front center, because I don't know if you notice there's a heart right there. That makes it a little bit more challenging to keep up with, but I will explain what you need to do and what you need to set up for that. But you can use the same stitch patterning chart that I'm going to use. All you need to do is focus on the heart. Okay, but I will end up putting that in here. So that is how you go about doing the math and everything for making it any size you want. And yes, it is complicated and it is time consuming, and so when somebody makes you a sweater, really take into consideration how much time it gets put into doing this. Okay, so why don't you go ahead and you move over to making it and seeing the video on how I make it. Now I gave you where it's going to be more fitted. It's not going to be a whole lot of growing room, and with her I wanted more growing room, so there's more length to the sleeves and it's a little longer. Okay, so I want you to keep that in mind, is what I've given you is exactly for a 5-year-old, but what she's wearing is something, and if you're watching the video, what she's wearing is something more for a actually it can be a 10-year-old to probably a 12-year-old if I'm taking a guess. Okay, so as you can see, the sleeves are longer. There's plenty of room to grow into, and so if you're doing this, understand that your sleeves are going to be shorter, and things are going to be narrower. The neck's going to be shorter to fold down. Okay, so you have the double options, and I have explained them in here. Alright, so why don't you go ahead and get your calculations done, or you can follow my video on how to make the size for like a 10 or 12-year-old, or you can follow the information below. Now, if you're making it for the 10 or 12-year-old, the bottom is still the same and if you want to make it for a 5-year-old, the bottom is still the same. You don't have to worry about that, okay? And the yoke part of it's still the same, okay? But your neck area will be different, and your sleeves will be a little different, okay? So, if you order the PDF, you'll have this video, and then you'll have the video on how to do that. So, how to actually make it, all right? And I think that's it. All right, I'm still working on the PDF, but it's a PDF in progress. But there is your formula. You can print it out, make it a little easier, and I will try to include my little diagram, my little person, so that you can kind of go in and write in your measurements and that kind of thing. And you can also go in and write in your rows and stuff like that, and make it a little easier on you. Okay? So that is how you do the calculations for your designing.